President, please visit. The court is now back in session. Before we proceed to counsels for the accused, we would like to ask whether fellow judges of the bench wish to have some questions to the witness. If so, you may. Judge Lavergne, you may.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Rockoff. My name is Judge Jean-Marc Lavergne. I have a few complementary questions to put to you in follow-up to those which have already been asked. I wish to return to an episode that has been discussed extensively. It occurred at the Ministry of Information. Now, in order to make sure that we are all on the same page, can you please tell us exactly where the Ministry of Information was located? And can you please tell the court if the building is still standing to this day?
Yes, the building is still there. It was used as the Ministry of Information up till April 75. It's on the boulevard that goes from the train station to the river. The street that's just north is Street 108. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how many hundreds of meters from the train station it is.
All of the events that we have recalled this morning can be found within a rather restricted parameter of the French embassy, the hotel that you resided at, as well as some of the other hotels, the Phnom Penh Hotel. Can you please tell us if you traveled to the south of the city, if this scenario was the same in the south as it was in the north? What was the situation prevailing in the areas beyond the perimeter that we have talked about this morning?
The area around the Independence Monument and a couple hundred meters south, that's as far as I got on 17 April. I had been much further south, going towards Tak Mau in the days prior to that, where there was massive evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people moving towards the center of Phnom Penh because of the shelling from the other side of the river, and the Khmer Rouge were approaching the bridge. On the 17th, as I said in my earlier testimony, when I got a little ways south of Independence Monument, the troops, Khmer Rouge soldiers headed north, were really dirty, bad mood, and seemed, I did not feel safe going any further south than where I was, so I turned around and went north.
Today, you described before the court a change in atmosphere. In the morning, there was a sort of joy and euphoria over the end of the war, and then the mood quickly changed. To your mind, did the shift in atmosphere happen abruptly?
I cannot answer if it was abrupt, but it was about midday as more and more people were headed out of the city. It was especially noticeable to me while detained by the Japanese bridge, the large number of people headed north along the highway. Nobody smiling, very somber mood. It was not like in the first hour or two of liberation when there were many smiles. People were glad the war was over. The mood did change, but I would not say it was all of a sudden everywhere. It was over a few hours.
Mr. Rockoff, did you ever hear about a person called Ieng Thirith and the Monasio movement, the nationalist movement? Did you ever hear anything about such matter?
This movement I heard about afterwards, sometime after leaving Cambodia, just through the writing of other journalists. And they were considered phony Khmer Rouge, not genuine. I believe there were some at the ministry early morning, but they did not seem to be in charge. At any rate, they were easy to identify. They had good shoes on, clothes were well-fitting. They were too clean, too healthy to have been out in the field. None of these people were around that afternoon, or late afternoon when Sidney Schonberg, John Swain, and myself went to the Ministry of Information. None of these people were still there.
Mr. Witness, did you go to the Ministry of Information once, or did you go twice on April 17, 1975? Did you go to the ministry in the morning or in the afternoon?
Both. I went in the morning, as the first group of Khmer Rouge were rushing up the steps into the entrance with their weapons. And you can tell that was in the morning by the direction of the shadows in my photograph. And the shadow goes from east to west. And then the afternoon, late afternoon, after 4 o'clock, maybe around 5, the shadow goes from the west to east. So yes, I made two separate trips, two completely different reasons. The second trip to the ministry was because I was told to go there.
Were you told exactly why you had to travel to the Ministry of Information?
That we were to go to the ministry was probably told to Dith Prawn, who told Sidney Schonberg that we would be going to the ministry. At first, I was thinking we would have to walk, but a truck pulled up outside and we were told to get in. So I assume it was an arranged ride.
Just now you told the court that you had the impression that of the Khmer Rouge who detained you, some were in contact with their superiors, and that was why you were eventually released. In your opinion, was it the superior Khmer Rouge who had ordered your authorization to go to the Ministry of Information, or was it the immediate guard who had initially arrested you?
Well, I don't believe it would be the Khmer Rouge who initially arrested us at the Prekat Milia Hospital, because there were obviously higher-ranking Khmer Rouge that they brought us to and who had control of us under the Japanese bridge.
Very well. I'm wondering if the audiovisual unit could display an image that we were shown this morning by the co-prosecutors. It is entitled Pol Pot, the Killing Embrace. He is the image that appears at minute 25, second 41. I would hereby request that the audiovisual unit display the image on the screen.
The President, you may proceed. Every Bush unit is instructed to put up across the screen.
Mr. Witness, do you recognize this image? Are you the person who took this photo?
Yes, I am. That is a photograph I took in the morning, the front entrance to the Ministry of Information.
And you told us that this photograph was taken in the morning and not the afternoon. Is this correct?
Correct.
And can you please describe to the chamber exactly what is happening of armed soldiers? But we also see civilians on this particular photograph.
The person in the white shirt standing in the doorway may possibly have been an employee of that ministry. He was in there when they came in. Another thing I would like to point out, one of the people running up the steps, one of the Khmer Rouge, is barefoot. The so-called phony Khmer Rouge, the group that you mentioned, I said earlier that they all had good shoes on. This was not one of them. The others, the phony KR, were very well dressed, very healthy, good shoes.
I would point out that the parties have been informed of a certain number of photographs that belong to the public domain. They can be retrieved through search engines that I will not identify. I would hereby request that this photograph, number 4, be given to the witness and also projected on the screens.
The President, indeed, you...
Would it be possible to have this image displayed on the screen, or would it be possible to display the entirety of the image? Unfortunately, the photograph is of poor quality. There appears to be a few technical difficulties. Nevertheless, I believe that all parties have access to this particular document, if that this is not in breach of any principle. I would just indicate that the photo actually does depict a sign identifying the Ministry of Information. Do you recognize this photograph, Mr. Rockoff?
I recognize it as a photograph I took, although it is not the complete photo. It's been cropped considerably, edited down, and reproduction is not good. But yes, it is from my original photograph.
Earlier on, you stated that you had an opportunity to meet somebody called Salot Chai at the Ministry of Information. This person talked to you about his brother called Solot Sar. Did you know Mr. Solot Sai very well?
Fortunately, we never met. His brother I never talked to. This was common knowledge at the Ministry of Information that, just as in the American Civil War, many families were split up, brother against brother. And Salot Chai just commented on his brother would be coming to town soon. It was something that was repeated by some of the Cambodian assistants and photographers. And I believe at the time he had no idea of the importance of his brother. I mention that because in the exodus out of Phnom Penh, he was one of the many people lost. To him, his brother was only a commander. He did not realize the importance.
Did Solot Chai carry out any official functions within the Ministry of Information? Did he hold any specific portfolio? What were his exact duties?
I am unable to answer that. I don't know what his specific job was. Also, I never interacted with him. It was just he was pointed out and mentioned that his brother was with the other side.
I'd like to turn to some of the events that unfolded at the Embassy of France. You've spoken at length about what happened there, and I'd like to go over some of the details surrounding the separation between Cambodians and other people seeking asylum at the Embassy of France. How did this happen? Were there any special instructions that were issued? I'm referring specifically to families who were mixed families. That is to say, families composed of one Cambodian parent and another parent of a different nationality. Do you know what happened to them? What is your recollection?
I have no knowledge of what happened after some of these people left the embassy or were forced out, but I recall things that happened within the embassy prior to their being put out. One tragic case was a French woman with a Cambodian husband. Khmer Rouge originally said could not go, even though he had papers and they were married. They said he had to leave, could not go out with his wife. About 10-15 minutes after he physically walked out of the embassy with other people, then the Khmer Rouge changed their mind and said he could stay. And it was too late for the woman and her children because the husband was gone. I believe that particular case has been written up in accounts by some of the journalists there. There were people who had to leave just because they did not have any kind of proper documentation. There were some people that were able to leave, were able to survive because of false documents, some provided by the French. They saved some lives. But the tragedy of the woman who was told her husband can stay 10 or 15 minutes after he walked out the gate, that was horrible.
In spite of these orders, was anybody able to escape the watch of the Khmer Rouge and travel on the same convoy heading towards the Thai border? Was anybody able to flee the surveillance of the Khmer Rouge?
I'm sure there were more than the one case I observed. I personally observed on the truck I was to go on. Young Khmer Rouge was supposed to count the number of people on the truck, 24 people per truck. And the Khmer Rouge was counting, and he counted 25. And this Frenchman with his, wife, girlfriend, I'm not sure, but anyways, she was traveling with him. He understood what was about to happen. He jumped off the truck, walked to the other side. The young Khmer Rouge did the count again. He counted 24. He walked to the second truck, started counting. That was the last we saw of him. And the Frenchman got back on the truck. So we had 25 people. Nobody ever counted again. And that's one life that was saved by a trick.
To your knowledge, were any foreigners spared from the evacuation plan, or did the evacuation plan apply to everyone? Do you see any diplomats from the communist bloc, for example?
Yes, the East Germans were forced out of their embassy at gunpoint by the Khmer Rouge, sent to the French embassy, and they were very upset at the conditions. Also, they had to give up their cases of gourmet food and pate and sausage, and they'll put it into the common food stock. They were very, very bitter. And a lot of us were laughing at them about their attitude. But they had to leave most of their food in the common food store for all of us. We had a very socialized kitchen arrangement for 3 weeks. If there are any other diplomats that came in, they did not end up in the Chancellery building with the rest of us journalists and others that were staying there. They might have gone directly to the other part of the embassy. But I remember how angry the East Germans were because they flew in specifically for the victory, and they were not invited.
When the Cambodians who had sought asylum within the French embassy compound had to leave, were there any personnel from the embassy or French authorities who took concrete action to leave the embassy? Or did they leave mainly through persuasion or under coercion, that is, under the threat of armed Khmer Rouge soldiers?
Unauthorized people were ordered out by the Khmer Rouge, and they threatened to come through and search for people. And that comes after the French officials and Chirac had worked out an arrangement where the Khmer Rouge, if they came into the embassy compound, would have to be accompanied by an official. Up to that point, Khmer Rouge and the French were always together coming through the compound. But the threat of moving through the embassy compound searching for illegals scared people. And so many of them may have left thinking there's safety in numbers and not wanting to be caught there alone. I cannot answer what motivated them, but there were threats, there was fear.
And among Lon Nol figures who sought refuge at the French embassy, were some driven forcibly beyond the embassy?
I was not present when Sisawa Sarikmatak was forced out, so I cannot answer what the scene was like. Sorry.
Earlier on, you stated that you heard gunshots during the departure, and you also stated that there were some refugees who headed towards the sports complex. Can you please tell the court which sports complex you are referring to?
The one that is directly north of the French embassy. It's right by it. I don't know the name of it. I'm sorry.
Unless I am wrong, I believe today it is referred to as the old stadium. Formerly it was referred to as the Stade Lambert. When you state that you heard gunshot, was that long after the departure of those Cambodian refugees? Were there many gunshots? What do you recall about such incidents?
Not an excessive amount of gunfire. A few shots, a burst of 2 or 3, a few individual shots, maybe a burst a few seconds later of a bunch. But it was not unusual in bad weather, black clouds, dark storm clouds, and it was starting to drizzle rain. It's not unusual to fire up into the sky, chases away the bad weather. That happens often. But I thought it was not going. They weren't shooting up into the sky. I couldn't figure out what they were shooting at, except for the ominous thought that hundreds of Khmer had just left the embassy within the past hour, and now this shooting. I mean, you could hear shooting in other parts of the edge of Phnom Penh going up to a week after the fall of Phnom Penh, but this at the sports complex was very unusual.
Mr. Witt, it appears that there's been some misunderstanding, because you could have been requested to come with some photographs you took of those events well in advance. Unfortunately, that was not done at the right time. However, there are certain photographs of yours that are well known and that are found on the internet, and that is why I have requested that you be given some of these photographs and that those photographs be placed on the screen so that you can tell us whether you are the author of those photographs or not, and in order that you may also make your comments on those photographs if need be. I believe there may be 4 photographs, including one which was already shown to you this morning. That is the photograph taken in front of the Ministry of Information. So, with your leave, Mr. President, may I request that the witness be shown these photographs? Very well. Would it be possible to have the first photograph placed on the screen?
The President, is there any identification number on the document?
This is a new document, since these documents are not on record. The only document on record was shown to the witness this morning, and that document was given to the court officer so that he could have it presented this afternoon at this hearing. So there is a first photograph showing a young soldier shouldering a gun. That's it. Can you tell us whether this is one of your photographs, and can you also tell us what this photograph represents?
Took that photograph, I believe, in 74, possibly late 73. It's on the road between Highway 5 and Nam Baset. It's a young soldier. He's carrying an M16 American rifle. That's an artificial flower. It's a wire stem that he stuck in the front of his weapon. It's not on his hat. You can see it's attached to his weapon.
Very well. Let us now look at the next photograph, which also features a young soldier carrying a weapon. Please place that image. I'm going to ask the same question. Do you remember when this photograph was taken and who? What?
It's a Lan Nol government soldier, and I forget exactly where I took it, but I took it, I believe, 74.
This morning, you told us that you observed that among the victims of that war were soldiers who were sometimes extremely young. Do you have a rough idea as to the age of this soldier on the photograph?
Maybe 16, 17. I doubt if he's older than 18.
Thank you. Let us now look at the third photograph. On it, we find a road scene. Perhaps that photograph could also be placed on the screen. I think it very well. Are you the author of this photograph, and can you tell us what it represents? Particularly, tell us who is this person standing on the pave to the left of the photo.
I took this photograph on 17 April, late morning. I do not know who the person with his hands up on the sidewalk in the white shirt is. Anyway, this is on Monivong. It's headed south. We're only 2 blocks or so from the intersection of Sihanouk and Monivong. The large building ahead of the Khmer Rouge, that's the movie theater that you see in the background of another photograph of a Khmer Rouge soldier standing up. I can only assume the Lon Nol soldier on the Vespa scooter was just very shocked at the appearance of the KR. He was surprised. In fact, he should not have been out there on the street like that. But we walked past, and I stayed at the intersection for the next maybe 45 minutes. That's where the huge pile of weapons that were confiscated were at. That's where I saw the soldiers being marched by towards the direction of Olympic Stadium. And this soldier, of course, the Khmer Rouge soldier, is barefoot. I was walking with a group of about a dozen, and I managed to walk a little to the left and get behind this guy in the midst of them, and that's how I was able to take this photo. I'm sorry these are not good prints. I really regret not having my own. Like some of the prints, like the Ministry of Information photo, is very bad reproduction. The original prints are much better, but my problem is I don't have an extra set with me. That is my fault.
When you look at this photograph, you have the impression that the soldier we see to the right is alone. Was he alone, or he was part of a group of soldiers?
He was part of a group. There were at least a dozen in this group I was walking with. You can't see them. If you saw the contact sheet of all the frames on the roll of film, you would see how the event proceeded. You would see the earlier shots. You would see where I moved into position to get this. Most of my photographs I pre-visualized and put myself into the position and wait till the time. So I was very lucky that they had no problem with me walking in their midst. Another thing, I would not want to be standing around on a street corner by myself and have people bother me. If you're walking with some soldiers, the other Khmer Rouge think you're with them. If I'm riding on a vehicle because I hitched a ride, nobody's going to bother me because they think I'm with the people on the vehicle, which is true. I was very lucky getting around for the first few hours that way. And then things changed completely when I was taken from the Calmet hospital. The Prekhet Milia hospital. Movement was coming to a halt. People were being told to leave the city. There was no more movement around Phnom Penh on the part of journalists.
I would like us to now look at the last photograph in this series. May I request the audiovisual technician to show that photograph if they have it. This is a telegraph photograph that was given to the prosecutor by DC Camp. Don't look at the comments on the photograph. Concentrate only on the photograph and tell whether this series of photographs were taken by you. Can we give the width these photos and have them placed? Let us bear in mind that only the photographs that are attributed to Mr. Rockoff in the document in question. So we have the first photograph. Can you tell us what it is all about? Are you indeed the author of that photograph?
That is my photograph. I took that on 12 April 1975. This is the site of the U.S. Embassy evacuation. And that is not the embassy in the background. This is just the open field used for it. These are Marines that are part of the perimeter security, set up security around the edge of the area. And they would have helicopters come in, pick up people, and then the very last lift of helicopters these Marines got into and left. I have many other photos of the American evacuation. This is, of course, one of my favorite, but I have others showing the helicopters, the people getting on, other things that went on.
Regarding that evacuation, in general terms, do you recall whether instructions were given to all foreigners and American nationals to leave the country? Do you remember whether instructions were given only by America or instructions given by so-called Funk or Grung, as they were known then, that is the Khmer Rouge authority?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I mean, we heard the American evacuation was imminent, would happen soon. I would say most Americans were aware of what was about to happen. But on the Cambodian side, there were many Khmer that should have evacuated, and maybe some who did not evacuate did not get the message in time, because the last lift of helicopters, the last 4 or 5 helicopters that lifted off from the field were very few people on them, the Marines and very few other people. Many Khmer showed up at the embassy, French embassy, days later, or maybe came to the Hotel Royale in the next 5 days, and they would have evacuated but did not know.
Let us move on, and I think we can now look at the next photo attributed to you. That is perhaps the 5th photograph in this document, unless I'm mistaken. Perhaps that photograph could also be placed on the screen. No, it must be the next photograph. There we are. Are you the author of this photograph, Mr. Ako? And can you tell us what it represents?
Yes, that is my photograph. I took that at the intersection of Manivong and Sihanouk Boulevard. The pile of weapons got very big over the next half hour or so. These are young kids that were pressed into service by the Khmer Rouge to help collect the weapons.
And who are those kids? Were they kids from the Khmer Rouge streets, or they were young Khmer Rouge? Who exactly were they?
I feel they were just ordinary kids on the streets. There were many kids, homeless kids in Phnom Penh. These are too young to even be government soldiers. They're not. They're just pressed into service. And I hesitate to use the word school children because the majority of children had no school to go to. No, they were put into service by the Khmer Rouge to collect the weapons from the soldiers.
We shall now look at the last but one photograph in the series. May I also request that it be placed? Very well, Mr. Rockoff. Are you also the author of this photograph? Can you describe the scene?
That is my photograph. That is in front of the French embassy. That is the gate that used to be at the French embassy, people climbing over. The Red Cross vehicle, which was pushed, they had gas, but the point is the Khmer Rouge don't want you driving. They'll let you push it. And you see all of the stuff in the vehicle. That vehicle was pushed from the Hotel Royal up to the French embassy, the Red Cross vehicle. And that is very late. It's quite dark. I mean, it's dimmer than it appears in the photograph. The smoke in the background is from an oil storage depot north of Phnom Penh that the Khmer Rouge set on fire the day before.
We can see the height of the walls and the gate of the French embassy. It is a lot higher today. Was it easy to scale that wall? Was there an agreement between the embassy authorities and the people so that they could get in?
I do not know about any agreement, but the French embassy was not pushing people out or stopping them from coming over. I think later on maybe they went through and tried to sort out who was who. The gate, which was easy to climb over. Half of the gate is still at the French embassy. It's in the back. That is the namesake of Mr. Bizot's book, The Gate. And as you know, the wall is maybe 3 times higher now. You see the French tricolor in the background. This photograph is in color originally. It was reproduced as black and white.
We shall now look at the last photograph in this series, and may I also request that it be placed on the screen. Are you also the author of this photograph? Is this the photograph you referred to a while ago? And what is this scene depicted?
This is not at the French embassy. This was sometime before the fall of Phnom Penh. This is a Lon Nol soldier who was shot in the head. He was brought to the Olympic Stadium where an emergency hospital had been set up. They were treating many hundreds of people on the basketball courts and so forth. Photographed this person being worked on. The wounded person was shot in the forehead, and the doctors were working on him. I have a picture when they pulled the plug on the suction device to drain his breathing tube, and he died. And this is his widow. This is about 20 minutes after he died. So I took a series of shots leading up to this.
So what you are telling us is that that photograph was not taken on the 17th of April, but shortly before then. Or did I not understand your testimony correctly?
Maybe a month or two before April. This was not at the fall. This was sometime before. The final offensive by the Khmer Rouge started January. There were temporary facilities set up in many parts of the city, to include expanding the facilities at Olympic Stadium. They took many wounded there. And this is not to be confused with a wounded government soldier that was in the French embassy after the 17th. Those are other photos of another soldier that I took.
Generally speaking, were the refugees who were coming into Phnom Penh treated properly by the government authorities, that is the authorities of the Republic, that is Lon Nol's government? Were they housed? Were they fed? How was their integration in Phnom Penh organized, if you know?
There were many thousands of homeless refugees living on the streets and parks. These are refugees that did not go to the established refugee camps set up by, say, Catholic Relief Service, CARE, or World Vision. Most of the camps were outside of the city. A very unusual refugee camp was on the site of the Cambodiana Hotel. The framework of the hotel was complete, but the rooms weren't set up. There were 21 to 23,000 refugees living in the Cambodiana. The swimming pool that you people use nowadays was a huge septic tank. I remember the photo I took. I mean, it was nasty. There was corn being grown. They were trying to grow vegetables nearby. The World Vision would bring food in, try to feed them, but this was a miserable urban refugee camp of 20-some thousand people at the Cambodiana. Most other camps were outside of town, where you really couldn't see what was going on. Very overcrowded. Many refugees chose not to go to the camps, the ones who thought they could get by in Phnom Penh. Sometimes they thought the camps were not safe because they were in contested areas, and often the Khmer Rouge and the government shells would land in the camps when they were fighting. But the Cambodiana was the safest camp. It was in town.
You have stated that when you left in a convoy of trucks, and you passed first in front of Pochentong Airport, and then you took secondary road. According to you, was that itinerary chosen deliberately, and were any particular reasons given for the use of such secondary road?
At the time, I did not think about that very much. Why? But I'm thinking because the mass of humanity that was thrown out of Phnom Penh went down the main roads like Highway 5. Highway 5 was north of here, and it was very crowded. And yet the road we went on went west of Nam Baset, whereas Highway 5 is east of Nam Baset. That was the visual reference I had on the truck as to where we were. Obviously, the Khmer Rouge would not let us look at maps. They're not going to tell us where we're at. There were very few reference points, such as the hills of Udong, Nam Baset Hill. The Khmer Rouge had used these roads for quite a while because it was hard-packed trail, double trail, the width of the Chinese trucks, or a Cambodian ox cart. Evidently, the Khmer Rouge would send young boys climb in the trees to pull the branches over the road, tie them together. It would provide overhead cover, green cover over the road from aerial surveillance. We crossed the stream. The stream probably would have been very deep in the rainy season, but there was like a rock road bed under the stream. So the trucks didn't sink in the mud. We just crossed the stream. The tires were only a few inches into the water. I assume in the rainy season when the water would be a few feet deep, you could still cross it because of the stone bed under the stream. It was very well done. You could see they had been using this route for quite a while. I did not see people in masses along that route. I said earlier that I did not see people executed or the signs of their being executed, but you could smell the death from a distance if the wind blew the right way. I could get whiffs of it, a scent of it. Also, some of the Khmer Rouge didn't seem so angry or hostile. They were curious. Always people trying to get cigarettes off of, always. And there was one there were a few Khmer Rouge that wanted to interact with the foreigners and were, I guess, pushed back or told to go back by their superiors. There was one Khmer Rouge I saw that really freaked me out. I was on the truck. We stopped waiting for permission to go through the next sector. And I'm just standing there looking out along with the other 23 people in the back of the truck, and this guy starts yelling, "Rockoff, Rockoff." I mean, he's calling my name, but I thought he's saying truck, truck, truck. I looked, and here's this guy in black, and I had never, ever seen this guy in black. I recognized him. He was a desk clerk at the Hotel Royale, and I had always seen him in white. And for the first time, I saw him in black. And then when I looked at him, and we sort of recognized each other, and then he wouldn't come near me. He looked nervous about coming over to me. He just stood there looking. He wouldn't come over, talk to me. I think maybe he was a little trying to be careful not to let his cadre know that he knew me. But it was a very, very unnerving experience running into this guy. I never saw him again. That was only a 20-minute stop, waiting for the permission to go to the next sector.
In which convoy were you, the first or the second? That is the convoy of vehicles that left the French embassy.
I did not hear that.
In which of the convoys were you?
I was in the first truck of the second convoy.
Were journalists issued any specific instructions to not talk about what was happening in Phnom Penh in order to avert possible difficulties during the journey? My question was if you were aware of any special instructions or orders given to journalists to not write any media articles about what was happening in Phnom Penh in order to avert and avoid any future difficulties.
It's my understanding that there was a self-imposed embargo on stories about this situation and the foreigners that was self-imposed by the journalist on the first convoy. They would hold back on the stories about the French embassy, the foreigners here, until the second convoy got out. I don't know the politics of who violated it first, but there were some journalists that jumped the gun and did stories before the second convoy got out. When the second convoy got to the Thai border, I think most of the stories had already been written and already out there by the first batch of journalists that got out. But the only word we had about the journalists getting out was brief mention on BBC, and we thought, good, if they got out, chances are we're going to get out also. So it was just a matter of waiting a few days till the trucks got back. But that was good news, hearing on the BBC that the first group got out, but there was mention of an embargo until the second or the last of the foreigners got out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Witness, for all of the clarifications and details that you've brought before us this afternoon. On that, I have no further questions for you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
The President, thank you, Judge Levin, and thank you, Ms. The President, before we adjourn, we would like to ask counsels for the accused, as they will have the floor tomorrow to put questions to the witness. Can you please advise the chamber as to how much time would you need to put questions to the witness, starting from counsels for Mr. Nuon?
Mr. President, I anticipate questioning for about half an hour.
The President, thank you. Counsels for Mr. Ieng Sary, please.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. Depending on what questions are asked, I may or may not have any questions for Mr. Rockoff. We do appreciate his testimony thus far, and if it were up to me at this point, I would probably not ask any more questions, but then something that might be raised by one of the teams might require us to ask a question or two. Thank you.
Mr. President, I believe that I would require anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes, and of course that is contingent on the questions that will have been asked previously.
The President, thank you, counsels, for the indication of time needed. Mr. Witness, since it is now the time for today's adjournment, the chamber will adjourn, and we thank you very much indeed for your time. We do need you to come back tomorrow as well. Tomorrow's session will commence from 9 a.m. and the chamber continues hearing your testimony. Hopefully your testimonies will be concluded by the morning session. Mr. Rockoff, as I already mentioned that your testimonies have not yet come to an end, we would like to hear you for tomorrow's session. So please come back to the courtroom at 9 a.m. Court officer is now instructed to assist with the rescue unit to ensure that Mr. Rockoff is well assisted during the adjournment, and to make sure that he is returned to the courtroom by that time. And the security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Khieu Samphan and Ieng Sary to the detention facility and have them return to the courtroom by 9 a.m. except Mr. Ieng Sary, who is instructed to return to his holding cell only, where he can observe the proceedings from there. The court is adjourned.